This is another making of video covering the process I used to create this fluffy hooded gaming character, using the iPad to start roughing things out, importing and setting up lights and materials in Blender, using geometry nodes to scatter objects, adding a rig with a little bit of object remeshing, setting up constraints and drivers to easily record performance animation, and using the Voronoi texture to mimic a 2D platformer game on the TV. The core of this idea is pretty much that I like my oversized fluffy hoodie, and I did a little doodle on Procreate that I later brought into Nomadsculpt, and created various objects with spheres, cylinders, and the like, and then voxel remeshed them and started sculpting them into shape, not paying any particular attention to topology. Had I gone back and done it again, I kind of would have experimented with more of the mesh creation tools to create the headphones, things like the tube and lathe. The GLTF was then brought into Blender with the file import GLTF command, and a lot of the materials were pretty much already present with the vertex color. So all it needed was just the vertex color plugged into the base color of a principled BSDF material. However, occasionally, as you can see here, I added various bump maps, and on the wall I added another Musgrave texture to adjust the roughness slightly, so you get the nice sort of interesting roughness pattern there. And on some of the materials as well, I used geometry nodes. We just switch over to add little sort of mottly, fluffy bits. And these were just sort of pill-shaped bits of geometry there. So I did that for the hoodie itself, as well as the sofa, and things are going to start slowing down in the viewport. The floor, which also has some added props, which were added in Blender later. Some little cheese puff things and just a glass that has been knocked over. And these cheese puff things were, again, constructed from geometry nodes, so just having the points being distributed over the surface of a mesh, the cheese puff, and then little dust bits, these little bits here, scattered over the cheese puff via geometry nodes. And the material set for everything as well. And the geometry nodes, also some dust was added, and that density was controlled with a Musgrave texture on just a piece of mesh like that. The carpet was made in a kind of similar way. We had the points on faces and the sort of pill shape on the points, and these were rotated and scaled ever so slightly, again with a Musgrave material and some random values here. I'm just going to switch off these geometry nodes now, as the viewport's taking a bit of a hit in performance, because now we're going to talk about rigging and animation. The rig was pretty simple here. Just drew a skeleton over the mesh and added some bones to help with the deformation, just because when auto weighting, it's sometimes faster just to add these bones as a kind of structure hold mechanism. The objects, for the most part, were just parented directly to a bone without any auto weights, which increases performance a little bit as well. Everything was done like that except for the hoodie itself, which needed to obviously deform. Originally, if I just jump to the original mesh here and switch on wireframe. Oh, is that the original mesh? That's the original mesh. You can see that coming directly out of Nomadsculpt without any retopology or refinement here, the density is insane, and auto weight did not like that at all, and I would be faced with a never-ending pain of weight painting and stuff, which I'd rather avoid. So to avoid that, I created this mesh, which was just simply done with the quad remeshing tool, which is amazing. I then added a multi-res modifier subdivided 3 times and added a shrink wrap modifier underneath that and used the original super high resolution mesh as the target, and then projected this multi-res modifier mesh onto the high resolution mesh, and then applied it, which applies it to the higher levels of the multi-resolution mesh, but still gives you but keeps this really nice topology to deform. The animation was really simple as well. The rig basically involved some IK constraints, which are targeted to a few parented bones here, and a sort of a follow constraint. I think it's follow. Track 2 constraint, which just looks at one other bone, so it keeps the head up. And then it was mainly just animating this bone here, which moves the hands around like so, with the aid of a driver as well. So a driver that just basically says, when you move on the x-axis one way, rotate along the bone, and when you move on the other way, rotate minus along the bone, which gives a super nice handy way of doing it. And that was how it was animated. I was just literally grabbing it with the mouse with auto key on and play, and just recording some nice movements here, and then doing the same with the lower spine here, just moving, that kind of thing. The light as well that is projected over the character is from a spotlight in the scene. This one here. And this spotlight has nodes enabled, and basically jump into it here. What it's doing is projecting a Voronoi texture, which if I decrease the radius, you can kind of see what that looks like. Yeah, you can see the sort of edges here. Just add a quick mesh. So that's the kind of pattern and shape, just simple kind of blocks. And then that is slightly blurred because of the size of the light, and animated as well. So it mimics like a 2D platformer game. So the texture moves from one side of the screen to the other along the X value here, and along the Y value, I believe. It just occasionally mimics a jump sort of effect. So every now and again, the texture jumps up, and this kind of gives it the feeling of a scrolling platformer with the background jumping to compensate for our main character here. The mix node up in the top right hand side is just a way of combining two of those animating Voronoi textures to enable a seamless loop. And finally, the other lights were just a couple of area lights either side to mimic rooms with tungsten bulbs, even having so much as a smaller area light with a more concentrated value here to mimic a bulb, and introducing some blockers as well. So just some shapes that block the light, so it feels like there would be furniture in the room, or it wouldn't just all be globally illuminated via the environment map, which was a 360 photo I took in an office, mixed with a warm color, just to again reflect this sort of tungsten feel. And that is pretty much it. The compositing was just some color adjustments. Let me just do a render here so we can actually see. And the compositing layers were a little bit, I introduced a little bit of the ambient occlusion back into it to give it more shape to it, as it was feeling a little bit flat. These denoising passes just drive the denoising node, which just cleans everything up a little bit. And the main image is also multiplied by a vignette, which is just a texture that I created in the texture area here. It was slightly gamma adjusted, so it doesn't feel so linear, and then applied over the top. And here the RGB curves are just a grade to see, to adjust the colors ever so slightly, bringing down the blues a little bit. Tiny bit of the dispersion effect from lens distortion. And yeah, that is about it. And then everything was brought in to the video editor, where I could just add some sound effects and stuff on top. That's about it really. It was kind of a fun project to start on an iPad and finish up on Blender. The files for this project, if you are interested and want to play around with it, are on my Patreon, but also on a Ko-fi account, which I would have hoped to have set up by the time I released this video. So you can get them there too. Hopefully this is interesting to some of you, and thanks very much for watching.